everybody. In this video, I'm going to be discussing Showtime's Shameless and discuss how it differs from other typical American city life shows through its realistic illustration of the consequences that come with living in urban poverty in the United States. Before I begin, this video will tackle topics such as violence, crime, mental illness, and others that could be triggering to some viewers, so please be advised. Okay, let's dive in. The academic study of poverty reemerged in the 1960s and characterized people of poverty as morally deficient, leading faulty lifestyles and experiencing personal failures. American anthropologist Oscar Lewis described a theory in which he called the culture of poverty as a result in a community's cultural norms and values, which look very different to norms and values of those more fortunate. Lewis's other theory, known as the cycle of poverty, is based upon these cultural norms and behavioral patterns and suggests that people of poverty are victims of their environment and that their self-defeating and destructive attitudes and habits keep them poor due to the environment that they've been exposed to, even if opportunities arise or conditions improve. Lewis argues that the culture of poverty creates trends in behavior and attitudes such as less focus on education, hatred against the police and law enforcement, early sexual activity, lack of impulse control, and a higher probability of abusing alcohol and drugs. The United States of America has an issue of severe economic inequality and class division. Neighborhoods and communities of lower class and poverty experience severe consequences and impacts in life expectancy, health care, crime, and violence. An estimated 34 million Americans live in poverty, around 6 million of whom are children, resulting in consequences throughout their lifetime related to nutrition and health. Low-income households face extreme challenges in receiving health care and insurance. Low-income jobs often do not provide health insurance, and around 25 to 29 million Americans live without health insurance or benefits. In these lower-class communities, there exist behavioral and environmental risk factors such as smoking, obesity, and substance abuse. These communities have little to no access or opportunity to receive counseling services, and they are the population of Americans who suffer most from chronic stress. On top of these systematic elements of healthcare, poverty-ridden communities also face health concerns with housing, heat, and water availability. Crime and violence is extremely common in low-income areas, and according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, guns result in an average of 33,000 deaths yearly in the United States. Most deaths and mass shootings occur in economically challenged communities with high rates of poverty. Chicago is a prime example of the stark differences in class and income demographics occurring in one urban city. The south side of Chicago is notorious in the United States for its reputation of being impoverished and often referred to as the hood and the ghetto, and known for being extremely crime-ridden. Other neighborhoods in Chicago, such as the Chicago Loop downtown, has homes that cost a median of $1.7 million. This just exemplifies the urban economic divide in this city. American television sitcoms primarily do not illustrate or represent this side of reality for Americans. Television sitcoms such as Married with Children and Schitt's Creek depict the highs and lows of living the American dream, or typical suburban American lifestyle. Showtime's U.S. Shameless, however, takes their viewers to the streets and inside the homes in the south side of Chicago and illustrates what being on the other side of America's economic divide is seriously about. Throughout this video essay, I will tackle topics illustrated in Shameless, including gentrification, queerness, addiction, health, and happiness, all in the context through what theorist Oscar Lewis describes as the culture of poverty and the cycle of poverty that the Gallagher family experiences through the show's 11 seasons. I argue that Shameless uses both drama and comedy to illustrate the realistic consequences that come with living in a poverty-ridden neighborhood in the United States, and how the television series challenged typical American TV entertainment with new representations and depictions of realistic consequences. Based upon the Southside Chicago neighborhood of Canaryville, which many people are from Irish immigrant descent, the Gallagher family lives and hustles through their turbulent life in poverty. The Gallagher children are Fiona, Lip, Ian, Debbie, Carl, and Liam. Monica, the children's mother, is an absent bipolar drunk and drug abuser. Their father, Frank, is around, but spends nearly all of his time conning, manipulating, and getting drunk enough to end most of his nights asleep in his own throw-up on the kitchen floor. Shameless embodies many, if not all, of the aspects to Lewis's theories on poverty. The culture of poverty is seen through the other secondary characters and families, where the Gallagher's situation seems rather normal. Cheating, stealing, and lying doesn't turn a head of a Chicago Southsider. The neighbors in this community are proud and united in their delinquent, alcohol-fused, paycheck-to-paycheck lifestyle. This can be attributed to the culture and cycle of poverty, where this is normalized in day-to-day life, but they also don't know any different. In this chapter, I will be discussing the Gallagher's family dynamic and the culture of poverty seen in the show. Shameless is currently airing their 11th and final season, so there is a lot of textual evidence to be evaluated, but to keep this chapter clear and concentrated, I will specifically be referring to the show's pilot episode, which is critical in introducing the Gallagher family dynamic and the Southside Chicago culture. Fiona has struggled with the responsibility of raising her 5 younger siblings and managing their household since dropping out of school at age 14. Since taking on adult responsibilities at a young age, when we meet 21-year-old Fiona in the pilot episode, it is clear her and her siblings have found methods for coping, and Fiona does her best to provide her siblings with the emotional stability and support they need while they do anything to get by. While Fiona is the rock of the family and manager of household responsibilities, the other Gallagher siblings have their own roles and responsibilities for bringing money for the family. And to highlight how different this American family is from others we see on TV, as the head of the household, Fiona is okay, if not complicit in, her siblings doing whatever they can to keep income and cash flow and stay afloat. Whether it's Lip falsifying his identity to take other students' SAT exams for money.
Slip. Test went well. No problem with the ID. Learned the benefits of your androgynous name.
Debbie running a summer daycare out of the house by herself at age 11, or Carl stealing lunch money from kids at school. And her unconventional parenting doesn't just come from juggling all of her responsibilities at her young age, but also the culture of poverty, where the term hustling is extremely relevant and blurring the line between law and morals is normalized when it comes to putting food on the table and paying for electricity, water, and gas. Frank Gallagher has his own methods of getting money. He cashes fraudulent disability checks to pay for his large open tab at the Alibi, the neighborhood bar. While Frank is a drunk, he certainly is not disabled. The pilot episode does well in illustrating the Gallagher dynamic and how the family fits well into the rhythm and culture of their neighborhood, while at the same time introducing us to other Southside neighborhood characters and families, like the Jackson family, whose lives look different than the Gallaghers. Eddie, Sheila, and their daughter Karen live in a nicer-looking home. Eddie is a devout Catholic and makes a stable wage as a security guard. The Jacksons are not as poor as the Gallaghers, but they are still far from your typical American family. Eddie has a strange obsession with clowns. Sheila hasn't left the house in years, and her main hobbies include being dominant in the bedroom with a collection of sex toys. And Karen portrays herself as the perfect pure daughter at home, but in reality is a self-proclaimed sex addict.
Necessarily call it an orgy, but there were a lot of naked body parts flying around.
The Gallaghers and the Jacksons are different, but neither family seems that out of the ordinary to one another. No strange quirks or family dynamics seem to surprise a Southsider. Shameless's pilot and the following seasons don't introduce you to the Gallagher family and pin them as the poster image of a poor family in the South Side of Chicago. Throughout its 11 seasons, Shameless introduces us to a variety of different characters in and out of the ghetto. The different behaviors and attitudes of characters throughout the series doesn't come as a shock to the characters in the South Side. The variety of personalities in this series is what makes the characters of Shameless feel human and relatable, even if you can't relate to their day-to-day lives at all. Moving on from the culture of poverty and Shameless, Chapter 2 will evaluate the evolution of some members of the Gallagher family in the context of Lewis's theory on the cycle of poverty. Quick refresher if you've forgotten, but the cycle of poverty refers to poor families being trapped in poverty for generations due to the environment they were exposed to and the lack of access to resources, making it difficult to overcome. To begin, we will discuss Frank Gallagher's life and the position of his cycle in poverty. Frank, to be completely blunt, is painted in the series as an absolute scum, but a charismatic and decently intelligent one at that. A theme that is reoccurring in Shameless, as well as in the concept and reality of poverty itself, is similar to the Greek mythology of Sisyphus, who pushes a boulder up a hill, and once approaching the top, the boulder rolls down, and he must repeat this as a punishment for all of eternity. This mythology can be related to Lewis's theory on the cycle of poverty. Like previously mentioned, once you're born into poverty, the systematic powers that exist around you make it extremely difficult to ever escape it. Frank Gallagher was a victim of this cycle himself. Frank's mother, Peggy Gallagher, was abusive, manipulative, and imprisoned for running meth labs, one of which exploded, killing 2 people. It seems life was never easy being a Gallagher. Even with years of alcohol and drug abuse seriously affecting his health, anyone who has watched Shameless could probably agree that Frank is a smart guy. He can get himself in and out of any situation he pleases. In Season 7, Episode 12, Frank reflects on his life when he first met Monica. He nearly had his life together and escaped the hood as a student intern at Northwestern University studying psychology. He met Monica while she was being chased by a rapist, and they got caught in a whirlwind of wild and indulging romance and were married within a week of knowing one another. We know Monica has serious mental health issues, and with Frank being predisposed to a lifestyle and culture in poverty, he returned to the South Side. Their marriage sounded like a toxic, abusive roller coaster, and both Frank and Monica became severely addicted to hard drugs and alcohol. Frank is not the only Gallagher who got stuck in the cycle of poverty. His 4 oldest Gallagher children have their own experiences similar to Sisyphus. At the end of Season 3, Fiona gains custody of her 5 younger siblings after a custody battle with Frank, and the Gallaghers' lives seem more stable than ever before. At the start of Season 4, Fiona is working at a sales company and receives medical benefits for her and her siblings, which none of them had ever had before. Fiona begins dating her boss, Mike, which might seem inappropriate, but considering her past turbulent relationships, Mike is a stable, well-accomplished, and nice guy. Things are going so well for Fiona, and as Oscar Lewis said, conditions have improved and opportunities have arrived. That is, until Fiona meets Mike's recovering addict brother Robbie, has sex with him. Robbie tells Mike and Fiona break up. Robbie gives Fiona cocaine as a peace offering and for her birthday. She parties and snorts lines in front of her siblings. Liam accidentally gets into the supply, has a cocaine overdose, ends up in the hospital, and Fiona is sent to prison. I know, a lot to take in. Wow. This could be a textbook example for Oscar Lewis's theory on the cycle of poverty. Fiona has self-destructive behaviors when it came to her relationships in prior seasons, but this was her rock bottom. She spent the rest of her time on the show working her way through her issues and the repercussions that came from this incident. Lip is the genius of the Gallaghers. He earns money for family by tutoring and taking other classmates' SATs for them and receiving a close to perfect score. When he gets a full ride scholarship to a school in Chicago, he goes but clearly feels like an outcast compared to the other students whose culture is centered around academia. At university, he struggles adjusting to the new pace of the workload while still indulging in his vices such as smoking cigarettes, weed, and drinking a lot of alcohol. Even though he has physically moved out of the South Side, his habits and familial responsibilities follow him. After Liam's cocaine overdose and with Fiona in prison, Lip takes the head role of leading the family, balancing school, and he steals food from his university job at the cafeteria to bring the kids dinner.
Ghetto chick leaves her drug addict boyfriend's coke out for a 3-year-old brother to eat. 0.5 gram in the system. Yeah, you're right. You can totally win.
I didn't do it on purpose.
Yeah, but you did it.
During his sophomore year, he gets into an inappropriate relationship with a professor, which is exposed by a jealous ex-hookup, and he loses his job as a residence attending. The professor ends up breaking his heart, and he goes on a sex and alcohol bender and wakes up in the hospital lucky to be alive after alcohol poisoning. He gets expelled from school for smashing cars and assaulting a campus security guard while he was drunk. Since the start of the series, Lip was smoking and drinking casually at the age of 17. With his bad habits and the culture in which he's been exposed to since birth, he suffers and self-destructs when he enters this new environment. He ends up going to rehab and spends the series as a sober but forever recovering alcoholic, working in a motor shop, and becomes a young dad, which just adds to his responsibilities. Ian dreamed of leaving the South Side by either enlisting in the Army or going to West Point. When Liam has his overdose, Ian illegally steals Lip's identity to enlist since he is not of age himself. He ends up committing military crimes and is hiding from the police. He gets diagnosed with bipolar disorder, just like his mother Monica, and spends 7 days in a psychiatric hospital ward. Throughout the rest of the seasons, Ian has his ups and downs with bipolar disorder. He became a certified EMT and advocated for himself to his boss that he could do the job while having bipolar disorder. However, just when things seem to be going well, he makes poor decisions which lead to detrimental consequences. With Ian being predisposed to bipolar disorder, which leads him to making impulsive decisions and having episodes of mania, anyone with the illness faces these sufferings. What makes Ian's situation worse is that he was not raised in an environment or given the resources to manage and cope with his bipolar disorder. With no educational intervention as a child, no healthcare to receive proper psychiatric help or counseling, and instead his only solution is to stay on his medication, which he does, but he still finds himself making reckless decisions. In season 8, he becomes gay Jesus and challenges homophobic institutions like the Christian church and attracts a cult-like following before ending up in federal prison. The last Gallagher sibling I'll discuss who got trapped in the cycle of poverty is Debbie. Debbie got stuck in the South Side before she ever had the opportunity to leave. At a young age, Debbie was acting like an adult, running her own summer camp business and taking care of her infant brother Liam when she was just a kid herself. When her teen years approached, her sweetness and dutiful behaviors quickly subsided and made it clear to everyone around her that she should no longer be considered a kid when she had been performing adult duties for as long as she could remember. At 13 years old, she tried to pursue a 20-year-old who insisted that they stayed friends. Debbie was persistent on losing her virginity as soon as possible and ended up getting him drunk and raping him.
I was barely conscious, okay? You date raped me.
You were on a date?
No, Debbie, you statutory raped yourself.
She later gets involved with Derek, a kid who is closer to her own age. Debbie tells him she is on the pill when she knows that it is not yet effective, manipulating him to have unprotected sex as she desperately wants to become pregnant and does. At 14, she gives birth to her daughter, Franny, and Derek abandoned her to live with his family in Florida. As a single teen mom, Debbie searches for other ways to provide for Franny by lying to older men and women, saying she is 18 to spark a relationship, and even moves in with a brain-injured, handicapped young man, hoping to get married to him for his money, but it doesn't work out. She gets into theft by going to playgrounds in yuppie Chicago neighborhoods and stealing luxury strollers and selling them on Craigslist. Debbie gets her GED and spends the rest of the seasons working as a welder, raising her daughter Franny and exploring her young adulthood by entering new sexual situations with both men and women. Due to the pressures and burdens Debbie carried out at such a young age, she grew up much too fast. Common in the culture and cycle of poverty, Debbie explores sex at an extremely young age, losing her virginity before she even gets her first period, and makes impulsive life-changing decisions. Debbie tried to be independent and avoid the duties she grew up with fulfilling for her family. However, through her destructive behavior and impulsive decision-making, ends up creating more obligations and responsibilities for herself in the long run. Shameless clearly reflects on what Oscar Lewis refers to as the cycle of poverty, because through the seasons, we've watched the Gallaghers try to make a better life for themselves and failing due to their habits of destructive behaviors, which is so natural and normalized to them given the environment they grew into. Every Gallagher's greatest fear is to end up like their father, Frank, and while he may seem like the epitome of a horrible dad, it seems that the patterns of poverty are becoming clear to them all. I chose not to evaluate Carl and Liam in this chapter because the two of them are still growing up. However, given what I've evaluated in the rest of their family members, it would be far from surprising if they never left the South Side themselves. When looking at mainstream entertainment television, specifically shows that portray the dysfunctional dynamics of North American families, it is uncommon to find a show that reflects the reality of the 34 million Americans that live in poverty. Throughout this chapter, I'll be reflecting on other family dynamic series such as Schitt's Creek and Married with Children to provide further evidence on how Shameless is a needle in a haystack in the realistic representations of poverty in entertainment television, specifically evaluating the topics such as gentrification and queerness in poverty. By now, I am sure that you understand that Shameless is an unconventional show, which is expected since living in poverty seems unconventional to those whom are more fortunate. Shameless presents a different representation of queer identity than other television shows with Ian and his partner Mickey. But first, I want to discuss queerness in Netflix's Schitt's Creek. David, the son of the Rose family, is pansexual, which is incredible progress in the representation of sexuality in mainstream television. I am not here to dispute that. It is incredible that David's character challenges typical queer representations by steering away from typical gay white man stereotype and instead being gender fluid and not categorizing behavior to gender.
This is not nothing.
He is from an extremely wealthy family that loses their fortune, and given his circumstances of being from privilege, his queer identity will be different from that of Ian and Mickey from Shameless. Why I call Ian and Mickey unconventional is due to the circumstances of identifying as gay in their culture of poverty and how that environment shapes their queer identities. It gives a different representation, one in which I had never seen before, and reveals progression in television's queer representation of identity. Neither Mickey or Ian portray the stereotypical feminine or metrosexual behaviors that are often associated with gay men in television, challenging the heteronormative constructions of whether if they are gay at all. In fact, these two characters are both hypermasculine. Mickey, born from a violent alcoholic father, is vulgar in his language, violent, and is one of the leaders in their community's street gangs. If they were to be assigned stereotypical roles in a relationship, Ian would be the more sensitive and emotional of the two. However, in their sexual relationship, Mickey gives himself to Ian as the bottom and is submissive for Ian to be dominant. This challenges the viewer to evaluate the heteronormative construction of sex roles by watching Mickey, the seemingly dominant of the two, become submissive.
Fuck you!
The sitcom Married with Children also takes place in Chicago. However, the Bundy family lives in a suburban home and abides by stereotypical American roles in their family. Both Shameless and Married with Children are characterized as dysfunctional Chicago families with no money.
The Bundy household is going to cut down on unnecessary expenditures.
The different living conditions between the two families is incomparable, and the Bundys' dysfunction revolves around their characters' differences in attitudes and personalities, versus the Gallaghers' dysfunction is defined by how they literally function to survive economically and emotionally. Throughout the seasons of Shameless, gentrification is discussed and is relevant in the topic of the United States as it occurs in poor urban neighborhoods.
They want to move people in who can pay taxes, so they push us out.
The South Side is slowly invaded by more affluent people that purchase cheap housing and business property to improve the value and increase prices, pushing out lower-class members of their neighborhood. While gentrification is not a topic explicitly portrayed in Married with Children, it is appropriate in my argument because gentrification and Married with Children both embody the damaging concept of the American dream. The Bundy family has the attitude that they are of the working class population in America and search for ways to better their lives and look for success, similar to those who participate in the process of gentrification. Gentrification damages the livelihood of people in poverty, often unknowingly and ignorantly. I find Married with Children to have similar damaging effect in the mainstream American television, with its ignorant and false representation of what they claim is working class America. To conclude, Shameless reflects Oscar Lewis's theories on poverty, as I discussed throughout Chapter 1 and 2, by evaluating the Southside culture and the Gallagher family's character development trapped in the cycle of poverty. To wrap up on how Shameless differs from other American family television, Katie Baker's article for The Ringer titled How Shameless Became TV's Proudly Resilient Cockroach summarizes the show's alternative representations by mentioning Shameless's showrunner John Wells' intent behind the series, stating how while the Gallagher family is dramatized and satirized, there are millions of real-life Gallaghers living in the United States, and how in poverty, the line between getting by and failing is so thin it's practically impossible to see. Shameless was intended to give shape to that line in mainstream television by providing representation for the millions of Americans whose realities are navigating the thin line of survival and failure.